All right, Mensa, how you been? Oops. Is everybody ready? Ready as we'll ever be. Okay. Thank you all for being here. This is our usual Monday morning press conference for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We have a relatively brief press conference today because it goes to some issues that are pretty straightforward. But as always, we're going to talk about two things. The first is what has been going on with gun violence over the last week. And the second is a specific case in which the issue of what is going on with bail in the city of Philadelphia and how cash bail completely and utterly fails us when it comes to gun violence, that issue is front and center. And it is front and center in the right place, in the right part of the city. We will tell you why in just a moment. I want to indicate who's present with us today. We have Chesley Lightsey, who is the chief of our homicide and non-fatal shootings unit, so we are clear she is an attorney. Sometimes people get a little confused because the Philadelphia Police Department's homicide unit is made up of detectives, and we work with them all the time. But the head of our homicide and non-fatal shooting unit, needless to say, is a prosecutor. She is an attorney, and that is Chesley Lightsey. We also have Bill Fritzy, who is the chief of our gun violence task force. That is a collaboration between the AG's office and the DA's office, has been for many years. He is also an attorney, and we work with some of the very capable investigators from the AG's office in what we do, trying to track down gun violence through that unit. We have Reverend Dr. Myra Maxwell, who is the director of the DAO CARES unit, which is Crisis Assistance, Response, and Engagement for Survivors. As you know, this is a unit that works intensely with the families of homicide victims during the first 45 days, and increasingly they are working with the victims of shootings, even when those shootings are non-fatal. And we also are honored today to have the Reverend Sean Wise, who is the interim pastor of this beautiful church, the Catalyst Church, where we are conducting this conference today. All right, some statistics. And you should know that there were some data glitches, so I'm going to give you two different sets of statistics, but they're consistent in the big picture. It's quite all right, as long as it's a good song.
Wasn't a good song. I totally apologize.
No worries, no worries. We believe in second chances, so it's all good. Just let me know when you're ready.
I'm going to second chance outside. You're good.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to look at two separate sources of data because there were some data glitches, and I want to make sure that we don't get too far away from reality. If we look at the week, that was October the 11th through the 17th, and that is taken from the Philadelphia Police Department's publicly available data. They have listed a total of 2 homicides for last week. Understand the week before it was 11. But they have listed a total of 2 for last week. If we look at a slightly different date range, which is the one that the DA's office usually uses, the 9th through the 15th, we see a total of 3 homicides and 31 non-fatal shootings during that period of time. I'll talk about that in a second, but let me give you some more data. So we are showing on our data 237 gun or gun violence incidents. kind of serious drug activity, getting $5,000 is nothing. It's easy as can be. And this is why I say cash bail is failing us. But I'll say it even more once we talk about the Tariq Bey case. I want to go back to the numbers because they do reflect something interesting. So during the pandemic, on average, what we have seen is about 1.5 homicides a day, which is obviously awful. What we saw last week was not, therefore, 10.5 homicides. It was 2 or 3, depending upon which date range you look at. The week before was more like the usual. It was about 11, more like what we've seen in the past. But what we are definitely seeing is we have seen in the last 2 months or 2.5 months some significant improvements in how much worse it was than last year. What do I mean specifically? Go back a couple months. You're going to see that on the PPD's data on their publicly available website, comparing a day in 2021 with the same day in 2020, we were up almost about 38%. And then we were up a little later about 36%. And then it was dropping and dropping, and we were up about 18%. And then we were up at 16 and 17 and 15. Well, as of today, if you look at that website, you'll see they have us up 14%. Is this something to celebrate? Absolutely not. These are intolerable levels of gun violence. But is it at this point becoming clear that there is a trend downward, that there are decreases going on in the number of homicides? It certainly seems to be the case, because we are now not looking at a week or a couple weeks. We're not looking at a single bad week or a single good week. We're looking at a steady downward pattern in these numbers. I mean, we can speculate as to what it's about. We have said from the very beginning that once you reopen society, once you bring back this level of prevention that we've already had in terms of open high school classrooms, organized sports, arts programs, job programs, economic opportunity, open rec centers. I mean, swimming pools are no longer an issue this time of the year. But once you bring that back, that you are going to see improvements. We are seeing it. Is that the cause? I don't know. I'd be lying to you if I said I did. But we are seeing improvements. And we are seeing significant improvements. You know, it is always too little when you've lost lives. But we are seeing significant improvements, and it's something that I think we need to take note of. Other indications, which you can also find in the publicly available database, other indications that society is opening up. Well, how about this one? During the beginning of the pandemic, you saw commercial burglaries going through the roof. Why? Because nobody was at their business, because businesses were shuttered. And you also saw home burglaries going down. Why? Because people were home, because their businesses were shuttered. That's what you saw happening as society shut down and as it was shut down. What you see right now is that commercial burglaries are down 47% as compared to last year at this time. So that is yet another reflection that if commercial burglaries are down, then what we're seeing on the street must be true, which is a lot of businesses are opened up. That society is coming back, not necessarily fully, obviously. We're still fighting all sorts of challenges with COVID and with the variants, including the loss of Colin Powell just this morning. We heard about that. But what we are seeing is consistent with what has been said for a long time by criminologists, which is that this spike in gun violence has a definite and clear connection to the pandemic itself. All right, so let me move on to talk a little bit about some of these shootings. On Sunday, October 17th at about 8 a.m. on the 5900 block of Chestnut Street in the 18th Police District, a 20-year-old black male was shot one time in the right foot. He was transported to Presbyterian Hospital, placed in stable condition. No arrest has been made by the police department. Anyone with information on this incident, and thank goodness it was only a shot in the foot, but anyone with information on it, please contact Southwest Detectives at 215-686-3184. There was also a homicide by shooting on Friday, October the 15th, at about 10 p.m. on the 3000 block of West York Street in the 22nd Police District. A 28-year-old black male was shot multiple times throughout his body. He was transported to Temple, where he was later pronounced. No arrest has been made by the PPD at this time. Anyone with information, please contact the PPD's homicide unit at 215-686-3334. We also had on October the 15th, Friday at around 4 p.m., on the 5900 block of Catherine Street, not too far from here. A black male about 34 years old. He was shot one time in the chest in the 18th Police District. Shortly thereafter, he was pronounced at Penn Presbyterian Hospital. An apprehension has been made by the Philadelphia Police Department, and a weapon has been recovered. ADA Chesley Lightsey is present and is available to respond to any questions regarding this incident at the end of today's press conference. You know, I have to be clear. We have to be clear. Progressive prosecution stands for the notion that you focus on the most serious crimes. You stop wasting time on things like the mere possession of marijuana so you can focus on the most serious crimes, and that is what we are doing, and that is what we have done. Last night, the city of Philadelphia reached a total of 438 homicides. Many of these shootings, and not all homicides were shootings, but the vast majority were. Many of these shootings are being committed by violent groups who identify themselves as 60K, Christie Rec, Pit Boys, Zoo Gang, Brickyard, North Side, South Side. These are names, nearly all of which have been known for decades in Philadelphia, have been associated chronically with violence for decade after decade. Please understand, if you are anywhere near being involved with one of these groups, we will vigorously prosecute you, and we will effectively prosecute you. If you point a gun at another human being and pull the trigger, you have made a decision that there is going to be a reckoning, that there is going to be a consequence, that that consequence is going to be an appropriately lengthy period of incarceration. And we are very, very, very good at getting convictions. So please, do not throw away someone else's life or your own, because there will be consequences and there will be a reckoning for it. Our CARES team remains available. It has responded to 6 families during the week of 10/9 through 10/15, providing advocacy, crisis support, and referral services as needed. Families and communities impacted by gun violence can contact our Victim Services and CARES Unit for support at 215-686-8019. All right, and now I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Bill Fritzie, who is the chief of the DAO's Gun Violence Task Force. In my view, that has been a very successful collaboration with the Office of the Attorney General. We are proud of the work that we have been able to do together with our attorneys and with their agents at many different phases. I'm going to call Bill Fritzie forward, and I want to thank Bill and also Helen Park for their leadership of this unit. And I also want to thank ADA Jeff Palmer for his work on the particular case we're about to talk about, and that is the case of a man named Tariq Bey, who is charged with the shooting of 2 people, and the shooting of these 2 people quite near here at the Christie Rec Center. Mr. Bey's history not only sheds a light on the problem we face, but it sheds a light on the enormous problem that the DA's office in the city of Philadelphia continues to face with bail commissioners who do not take the shooting of another human being to prove that you present a danger to the community. I don't think that's a difficult concept. I think when you point guns at young people and shoot them, and you do it twice, it should be pretty clear that if there is probable cause to prosecute you and strong evidence of your guilt, that you should sit in a jail cell until your trial. And then you should be effectively prosecuted, and assuming you are found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, you should sit in a jail cell for an appropriately lengthy period of time, because you present that danger to the community, and frankly, you present that danger to yourself by getting back out there. I am a little outraged by what happened in the Tariq Bey case, because we have been talking about the failures of our bail commissioners, not all of them, but some of them. We've been talking about the failures of our bail commissioners to take seriously shootings and to take seriously other gun violence cases now for well over a year. And this story is atrocious. I mean, there's no other way to put it. This is an appalling and atrocious story, and there's a lesson in it. But I'll get to that lesson in a minute. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Bill Fritzie to provide specific information on the case of Tariq Bey.
Good afternoon, everyone. On April 7th, of 2020, police responded to 5800 Angora Terrace. At that time, they discovered 2 victims who had been shot in the area of the Christie Rec Center. Both were teens. One was shot in the left leg, the other in the left arm. The scene was processed. A Taurus 9mm handgun was recovered. It had an obliterated serial number, 8 40 caliber FCCs, 11 9mm FCCs, and 1 live .380 caliber round. The defendant in this case, Tariq Bey, was also taken to the hospital at the time. He had a gunshot wound to his head. This case, as I mentioned, happened in the vicinity of Christie Recreation Center at 55th and Christian Street. And these individuals who were involved have taken the names of those neighborhoods and used them as a way to claim some type of affiliation with each other. So with this group, we had Christie Rec, and they were warring with a group that likes to refer to themselves as 60K. Earlier in the day, there had also been a shooting, and we believe that the shooting of these 2 individuals was in retaliation for that earlier shooting. The facts of this case, there were a lot of facts and a lot of evidence to be looked over in this case before we could bring charges. So ADA Jeff Palmer was involved through the Gun Violence Task Force, and charges were eventually approved on March 16th of 2021. An arrest warrant was put out for Bey. It was placed on Instagram, all types of social media, because we knew he had been in the 18th District and police department was looking for him. Unfortunately, he also knew we were looking for him, and so he was not in the Philadelphia area, and it took the help of the U.S. Marshals to arrest him on October 6th of 2021. At that point in time, Mr. Palmer was involved himself with the arraignment of Mr. Bey, whose bail on the double shooting was set at $175,000. Believing that that was too low to keep the community safe, Mr. Palmer appealed that bail to the municipal court. Bail was then lowered to $50,000, $25,000 for each victim. Mr. Palmer and myself then attempted to file a motion to stay that order so that the bail would not be lowered and the defendant be released. However, we just did not have enough time because this occurred overnight. And so we were not able to get that motion signed. However, the next morning we did sign a motion with the Court of Common Pleas. I'm happy to say that last week on October 15th, that hearing was heard by the Court of Common Pleas, and Mr. Bey's bail was revoked and he was taken into custody at that time. In order to get that done, we also presented testimony from the captain of the 18th District to explain to the judge the problems that are occurring in the community and the violence that he's seeing. As mentioned, this bail was wholly inappropriate. 2 teenagers shot at a recreation center. $175,000 is not appropriate, let alone lowering that bail, because it affects the community in such a way that we're just allowing people back out on the street to take another chance at shooting again. But at this time, Mr. Bey will be held in custody, and he will be awaiting his preliminary hearing at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fritzie. Let me make sure we didn't miss anything here, okay? You have an individual who points a gun at 2 human beings, both of them young, shoots them. He is essentially on the street in the wind from March of 2020, which is essentially, I believe, April of 2020, which is the beginning of the pandemic, for close to a year, which means they couldn't find him for a long time, even after there was a warrant. And once he is found, he goes in front of a bail commissioner, and no, I'm not going to put that bail commissioner's name out here because I made a commitment a long time ago not to pick on judges, even bail commissioners, the way some of my predecessors did. We respect their independence. But that doesn't mean we have to look the other day when it's absurd. And what happens is that bail commissioner looks at this situation and says $175,000 bail. Do some math with me. 10% of that is $17,500, and a third of that is, let me get my math right, is a little bit under $6,000. to get out for shooting 2 people, for putting bullets into 2 people. So we then, as any sane person would, said this is outrageous. And we appealed it to a municipal court judge. Once again, I won't put that judge's name in it for the reasons I've said. And that judge makes it clear that that judge doesn't want to be bothered with this appeal and lowers the bail to $50,000 on one case and $50,000 on the other case, a total of $100,000. We've gone from $175,000 down by appealing and asking for a higher bail from what was already outrageously low. And let's do some math on that one. So for each person who got shot at $50,000 apiece, 10% is $5,000, and a third of that is $1,600. $1,600 apiece. That's quite all right. $1,600 a piece. Really? So the good news, of course, is that once we got this in front of yet another appeals judge, we got some sense, because that bail did not hold Tariq Bey in custody. He got out and ran, which was to be expected. That is another aspect of bail. They're not supposed to run, but he ran. And when we got back, we finally had a judge listen to us. And that judge said, no, Mr. Bey cannot pay bail, period. This is what we have been asking for from the beginning. Cash bail is a complete failure. The notion that you can guess on a number and you can figure out whether that number is going to hold somebody, especially when it's a low number that gets lowered to a lower number, is absurd. This does not work. Cash bail is completely failing us. What we need is the elimination of cash bail. So someone like Mr. Bey, under these circumstances, could be held in custody with zero option to pay bail until he is in court, and then a court will sort out whether or not he is to be found guilty and what comes next. That is what we need, but our Pennsylvania legislature is not ready. They are too busy trying to do recounts of Joe Biden's victory. They are not ready to do anything sensible except kiss gun manufacturers and try to come up with mandatory sentences. These are not solutions that have any legs at all. So I am asking the Philadelphia courts right now to do something differently. And I'm not the first one to ask it. A similar ask came from the former public defender. I am asking them to take all shooting cases and not have bail commissioners hear them, because these cases can be heard from the very beginning by municipal court judges, actual judges, people who are elected by Philadelphians, are accountable to Philadelphians, have heard trials before, have supervised people on probation and parole before, and have some level of judgment about it. Yes, there are some great bail commissioners out there. But this is a disaster. This is completely unacceptable. And what this system should do, I'm asking President Judge of the Municipal Court, Patrick Dugan, to do it. What this system should do is take all shooting cases, because they are so serious, and rather than have a bail commissioner who may or may not be a lawyer and is not in fact an elected judge, instead of having bail commissioners hear these things in the middle of the night, have hearings done by municipal court judges on bail, even if it takes an extra day. Give the public defender time to go talk to their client. Give us the time to be fully prepared, and put us in a room where there are notes of testimony, there are rules of evidence, we have a record of what happens, and everybody can be accountable for what they do. A little known fact is that bail commissioners do not have a record. Bail commissioners, when they do arraignments, do not have a record. There is no tape recording that is available to the public. There are no notes of testimony that are available to the public. And the decisions they make happen all day, so some of them are happening at 3 o'clock in the morning. We need a level of accountability. We need a level of accountability to voters and to the public. We need a level of accountability in order to be able to look and see what we as an office did, what the PPD did, what a judge did in considering something like the bail of Tariq Bey. I am asking the President Judge of the Municipal Court of the City of Philadelphia to work with us to immediately establish a situation in which we can have real judges hearing issues around bail from the very beginning with a record that will document exactly what happened. All right. Now, before we go to Q&A, I do want to bring up Pastor Sean Wise for his remarks. We are grateful, of course, to be here with him. This is a church that's involved in a lot of really important work in the community, where the door has been wide open, the arms have been wide open to our efforts, and it is my honor to ask him to come forward and comment on this press conference.
Good afternoon. Truly, there is a crisis in the land, a crisis in our nation, a crisis in our city, but in particular, there's a crisis here in Southwest Philadelphia. And that crisis is violence, in particular gun violence and murder in our streets. We've discovered that the people in this community have value, have dignity, and they are worth fighting for. They deserve to live in peace and without a sense of fear for their lives. And so we are committed to doing all we can to ensure that there is safety on the streets. We hope and pray that this district attorney's office can do all they can do to make sure that those that are evil are put away. There must be peace in the streets, and there must be safety in our streets, and there must be a sense of justice going on in this land. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Wise. Final word. I'm going to quote one of these judges, the one who got it right and finally determined that Mr. Bay would remain incarcerated until his trial by deciding that no amount of bail was appropriate in his case. She said to him, "I'm saving your life." That's what she said. And she's probably right. It's not just a question of saving everyone else's life. It is a question of saving the lives of those who have been drawn into this at either end of the gun. Are there any questions at this time for any of the people who are here? Yes, sir.
Concerning your proposal, have you made a formal request to President Dugan in writing or in person or on the phone about, municipal judges hearing shooting cases?
This request was something very close to it. This request essentially was made well over a year ago, and it was made not just to Judge Dugan, it was made to other people in court administration as an aspect of a larger and more generalized proposal for how to deal with bail that the Public Defender's Office raised. We were supportive. We were in those conversations. What I'm asking for here is actually less. I'm not asking it for all F1s or all of the most serious cases. I'm asking for it on gun violence right now. Let's see what we can do.
You heard back from Dugan or his office?
Let me just say that in the more than a year since we made that request, there has been no progress.
Okay. And so, concerning your proposal to let municipal judges hear gun violence cases,
To hear them at the bail stage is what I'm talking about. Yes, sir.
Doesn't the very incident that you highlighted sort of undercuts your argument, because in that case, a municipal judge heard the appeal of the bail and reduced the bail?
Well, certainly, it is very disappointing what that municipal court judge did, but I want to make sure that we're clear on the process here. What actually happens is that bail is being set in the middle of the night before public defenders can even talk to their client. It's being set by a bail commissioner, and then if you don't like it, your appeal is also not on the record. It is a phone call to a municipal court judge who's at home, who is an emergency judge. That's how this works 90% of the time. I used to do those phone calls myself when I was a young public defender. So you're going from a room where there is no record to a phone call where there is no record. And it probably will not be a surprise to anyone that some judges don't want to receive that phone call in the middle of the night. They might even try to punish whoever made the appeal by going the wrong direction on bail, just to discourage future appeals. They might do that. I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting something entirely different, which is that 5 days a week, if not more, in an open municipal courtroom where there is a court reporter, there is a stenographer, there is a record, a real hearing is done in that courtroom with a judge, so that we all know what happened in that hearing, so that the prosecution has a little more time to be prepared, so the defense has more time to be prepared, so these issues can be heard. Another thing I think is very important to understand is that bail commissioners don't have certain powers, but municipal court judges do. So for example, on a domestic violence case, when a bail commissioner says, okay, stay away order, It's nice that they said that, but it has almost no legal effect because there's no database. There is no database that includes the fact that they ever said it. When you go to municipal court, those judges have the power to actually do an order. They have judicial power to do an order that is a stay-away order. That can be docketed, that can be enforced, that can be the basis for other criminal charges. And you also have, when you deal with municipal court judges, the capacity to do some things along the lines of house arrest. So it is not the same thing to have a midnight phone call to a municipal court judge who, in this case, in my opinion, clearly went the wrong direction, and maybe to discourage appeals. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about a judicial system where we do detention hearings on the most serious cases in a way that looks like a courtroom. It looks like a court proceeding in the same kind of way that they are done in federal court, where you have real hearings with real judges in a real courtroom during the day, and where you can actually keep a record of that. This should not be a stretch, because at various times the municipal court judges have sat in for arraignments. In other words, they have taken those 8-hour shifts, a couple of them, and have sat in there and have set bail. There's nothing illegal or inappropriate about this. This is just a matter of the will of the court system to do things a little differently in a crisis. And even though I have been talking to the president judge of the municipal court since I'd say a little bit after March of 2020, because we've kept a spreadsheet on what has happened with bail in these cases. Even though I've been talking to him since then, have given him confidential data reports and statistical reports, this is where we are. Tariq Bey is where we are. And that is just unacceptable.
Regarding Mr. Bay's case, did he go on the run after the municipal court judge lowered his bail? What was the timeline of when he was released?
So I think I know that, but I want to make sure I don't misstep.
Mr. Bay left the Philadelphia area. I believe we tracked him to Washington, D.C., and then later to Atlanta, Georgia. We actually provided service to him on his Instagram account, letting him know that he had to come back for court. He did appear on that Friday, though. He did come back for that bail hearing and then was taken immediately into custody.
October 15th.
October 15th, yes.
So in other words, he was able to pay bail, get out, and run?
Correct.
Are there any other questions?
The gun that Bay had, you said the serial number was obliterated, right? Do you know if that was a stolen gun, or do you know how he came about getting that gun?
I don't have all the details. As I mentioned, this is Mr. Palmer's case. As far as firearms with obliterated serial numbers, oftentimes they have been stolen because there's a reason that people don't want them tracked, but I can't give information as to what Mr. Bay knew about that firearm, or if it was the firearm that Mr. Bay had at the time of that shooting. There were multiple FCCs, so multiple firearms at that scene.
Is that information we could provide later to Mr. Dean?
We can look into it and provide it, yeah.
Okay, and so, Bay, was he known to law enforcement, or was this his first time shooting someone that you know, or first felony charges?
He is known all the way up through the police department. As I mentioned, the captain of the 18th Police District came to the bail hearing to let the judge know what a community safety risk he was. He has had previous arrests. I believe his last arrest was pulling a firearm on a store clerk who told him to put a mask up.
Could you spell his first and last name?
Tariq, I believe, is T-A-R-I-K. Last name is Bey, B-E-Y.
So if I understand your request, you want no bail for any gun violence? Is that what you're asking?
We are asking, as always, on an individual basis in each case. In general, on a shooting case, there's a very clear pattern of our seeking high bail. Generally, that has taken the form of seeking about $1 million bail, because that's really about what we can do with the bail commissioner. However, if we could have these hearings in front of municipal court judges with a full record, we would be better positioned to ask that people be held without bail. In other words, they are held in custody and there is no amount of bail that they can pay.
Wouldn't that be considered a violation of his civil rights? To prevent no bail for someone who's supposedly innocent until proven guilty?
So the short answer to that, and I say this respectfully, is no. It's not a violation of civil rights when the prosecution is able to sustain its burden of showing that no combination of conditions can ensure the safety of the public under those circumstances. In this case, there was also a risk of flight, as it turns out. But the two main things that we are looking at for bail are, does this person present an immediate danger to the community that is real? Unquestionably, that standard is met. And also, the second factor is whether or not the person is going to show up for court. Here, he ran about as far and fast as he could, which was one more reason it should not have been granted. So, no, we have had a system in which people are routinely held without bail for a gun homicide. That has been standard, and even in the bail commissioner's room, they understand that for a charge of first-degree murder or murder generally, which includes first-degree murder. What we are asking for here is simply to have a full hearing and being able to develop fully specific circumstances why certain people should either have a high bail or in other circumstances should be held without the possibility to pay bail.
Now, was he part of the 60K gang or the Christie board?
So that's something you want to answer, Mr. Fritz?
Don't want to answer that.
Yeah, no. I appreciate the question. I know why you're asking it, but for reasons that are internal and investigative, we don't want to speak on that right now. Let me say this. I do understand, as someone who was a civil rights lawyer and a defense attorney for many years, I understand the argument that one of the consequences of holding people in bail before they go to trial is, some of them will be acquitted. And that will feel unfair that somebody sat in jail for a period of time but was ultimately acquitted. But that argument always takes me to the same place, which is, okay, when you arrested Charles Manson for the first time for killing, he wasn't convicted. What was the answer? Let him out? When they arrested Ted Bundy, who, before he was executed, admitted to killing about 30 people, an awful lot of them women victims who had similar appearance. Where does that argument go? And I'm not saying it's your argument at all. I'm not saying that. But where does the argument that I sometimes hear go? That Mr. Bundy should be able to hit the street because they only arrested him for killing one? Because they only arrested him for killing two? Should we keep putting him out there? A guy who, by the way, escaped from custody twice, Ted Bundy did. Should we keep putting him out there until we have a conviction, and then it's okay to hold him? I think it's our common sense tells us, and our normal interpretation of constitutional and legal standards tells us, that there are some defendants who are such a danger they need to be held now, and they need to be held before they have their court proceedings. So, someone who is shooting two people in a public space, shooting two young people, the only difference between that and having two fatal victims is aim. That's all it is. So, and I do also take seriously what the final judge said, the one who got it right, when she said to Mr. Bay, "We are saving your life." Yes, sir.
You don't want to name the bail commissioner or the municipal judge. And some people will say, well, listen, if it's a problem and these are public servants, then that's part of the problem. That's part of the story. And so why are you, who are you serving here if you don't put their names on the public record? You're talking about there's no public record.
Mr. Dean, I've known you for a long time, and I take your journalism very seriously. It's not hard for you to find out. But there's a difference between your finding out, which is not hard, and perpetuating a long history of what Lynn Abraham used to do, which is she would use her bully pulpit to call out and pick on certain judges. She would try to have a chilling effect on their independence when she knew that the rules of ethics for judges make it so they can't answer back. And I'm not somebody who's going to punch somebody whose hands are cuffed, okay? I think we can all go to the public record, we can all go to available documents, and to the extent journalists want to know more, they can find that, but there's a difference between that and my using my bully pulpit to say things about judges who are ethically prohibited from answering back. I just don't punch handcuffed people.
For clarity, you're proposing to have high bail or no bail for people who shoot people, who actually shoot people who survive, non-fatals.
Yes, I mean, as with all things, I will give you one example of a case where we did not go in for that high bail, all right? Just to show you how unusual and exceptional it is. We had a case where a woman who had a permit to carry a firearm was in her home, and she got into some kind of a confrontation dispute with a man she knew in her home. She ended up shooting him in the leg. The police believed that it was a crime. Her defense attorney contended that it was self-defense, and we felt that we had probable cause in that case, but we also felt that this was more complicated than members of one of these gangs going to a rec center and shooting young people. So that was a situation in which we agreed to what was essentially house arrest. It was something like $250,000. Sign your own bail, meaning you don't have to pay it, but you're also on house arrest. We believe in individual justice. We don't believe in one size fits all. But the truth is, in almost all of these cases, in almost all of them, yes, we're going to be seeking very high bail. When you get to the point where you point a gun at another human being, it's loaded, and you pull the trigger. Hello, Chesley, how are you? When you get to that point, it is best for everyone that you are able to be in a place that has bars where you cannot get out until we sort this out in court. Ms. Latesy?
I just wanted to clarify for you.
Please.
Well, just want to make sure that Mr. Dean understands that on every homicide, okay, a murder, we are seeking without bail, and we get it. It's by law. Yeah.
Murder one.
Murder one. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yeah. Now, that is correct on essentially every murder one, which that case was not. And on, but, you know, understand there's 5 levels of homicide, right? But on every murder one, first-degree murder, on every murder generally, which means we're charging all these different levels of murder, on nearly every, I think every single one, we have sought that people be held without bail. The legal basis is simpler because it is in a constitutional amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution. Are there any other questions?
Just make, what was the motive for Bay to shoot these 2 teens?
If you know, and if you are.
You know, I wish I could tell you the motives to these shootings, but it really comes down to they just don't like the other side. That's what we're seeing over and over again with these young people. They don't like people that aren't part of their group. And so they will look and they will target and they will shoot people based on that. But we believe that actual shooting with Bay was retaliation from a shooting earlier in the day. But it all involves just young people not liking each other and using firearms.
And did they have any accomplices that you're seeking or who you arrested for the shooting?
As I mentioned, it's not my case, but I think we have who we have at this point, but investigation continues.
All right. Thank you all. We appreciate your attending this conference. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
I did not mean to interrupt you in this case.
No, it's fine.